This is Rob Christ, and I want to tell you about God's lavish love for me that's shown in Psalm 23. And it's a promise of fulfillment and abundance. Now, of course, the famous line, God is my shepherd, that's really the metaphor that you see through the entire psalm. Sheep in Israel were in constant danger, and still are, of drought and lack of forage. And David knew about this because David was a shepherd. So when he took his sheep around, he was always looking for water and for forage for his sheep. And it also is a metaphor for David's journey himself through danger. Now, Psalm 23 is often read in times of grief, and that's very good because it supports us. It's a reminder of God's lavish love for us, even in times of trouble. God not only protects and feeds us, but God also celebrates us. And what could be better when we feel grief, shame, or loneliness, that God is there ready to throw a party for us, ready to celebrate us. So I'm going to go through line by line, and you can see how the Hebrew kind of gives us a little bit different view of this of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. This is what you've heard as the opening line forever. Now, it's the Lord is my shepherd, I will not lack. The traditional view is that God will provide. But another view is that God is with me so I can trust God to provide. So it's a future tense here. I will not lack. I can trust that God will provide for me. The word Lord, which is called as Adonai, which here, this is actually Yahweh, if you pronounce it out. But in Hebrew, we often say Adonai for that. That word occurs in this verse and occurs in the very last verse. And they serve as bookends of care, that God is throughout. The Lord is throughout. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. And when you look at the Hebrew, though, it's a little different. This line is actually quite a bit different. In new grass, he will cause me to sprawl. Along waters of resting, he will lead me. He will restore my life. Now, traditionally, we look at this and we say, God does good things for me in order to restore me, and that is very good. But when in the Hebrew, there's a little bit of a more of a extravagant view here. And one of them is this word here, it's called dashe. And dashe is actually new grass. And new grass is that first sprouts that come up out of the ground after a rain. And in the desert, that means so much. And the verb for this is not just simply to lie down or to be made to lie down. No, it's to be made to sprawl, to be caused to sprawl and you get this feeling that the sheep are like splayed out on this brand new grass and joyfully rolling in it. That's much more of the imagery of this. The other thing is there's a bit of a misnomer here in our English translations. It says be beside still waters. And it's not the waters that are still. It's actually the waters of resting. Instead, it's a place where the sheep can rest and not worry, and they can relax. And with fresh grass and water, it means that the sheep's life will be saved. And through the metaphor, that David's life will be saved, or our lives will be saved with this fresh grass and water. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He will guide me along the circuitous paths for the purpose of his reputation. That sounds quite different. Because in the traditional view, we say, well, God's my moral guide. He'll show me how to be righteous for his own glory. But in the Hebrew, it's more, we can not only can we trust in God to give us what we need for food and water and restoration, he will show us the right path. Now, there's a little explanation that's neat here, because when you're in Israel and or in the hills of Judea, you can see these sheep and goat paths through the desert along the hills. And around Jerusalem, Jerusalem's very high up into the mountains, and there's lots of hills and ravines around. You can see the sheep walking along the paths. And it's not a straight path. They can't go directly up to forage. No, they have to wind through on these circuitous paths to get there. And you can imagine a shepherd like David taking his sheep through there. But the thing that's most astounding here is that this is not just to make God happy, it's for mutual benefit. God is doing it because it pleases God to make us whole. It pleases God to feed and care for us. So God is our friend, wanting to show us where the food and the forage and the water is for our mutual benefit. It's a little bit different than our English translations make us feel. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, even though I must walk in the valley of deep darkness. Traditionally, we'd say, even though there's death around me, God will take care of me. But again, you have to think about, where was David in this? Because that right path that the sheep have to take to get to water and forage may lead them through deep, dark valleys and through the danger to get there. Because David at this time was hiding in the ravines around Jerusalem. He was under constant threat. Saul was searching for him, trying to kill him, trying to eliminate him. And David was hiding in the valleys. Any wrong turn he took, he might have gotten in trouble. And it was not only Saul, but it was also the Philistines were after him too. So he was under great threat, but David could trust God to lead him through, just like the shepherd leads the sheep through the valleys, the dangerous valleys with predators around, to the forage. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I will fear no danger, for you are with me. So traditionally, God will protect me from evil, so I don't have to be afraid. And that's good. This line is at the center of the psalm. And the reason why danger might be a little bit better word here is because it's the confidence that David has that God will protect him from danger and bring him through these dark valleys. It's not only the center of the psalm position, but it's also the center of the psalm in message, is that God, I can trust God to protect me. He will protect me because God is with me, walking beside me. Again, my companion. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And I chose a few different words here because I think the Hebrew is a little bit closer to that. Your club and your cane comfort me. God's strength and support gives me comfort for sure. And that is in the traditional view. But the reason why a club may be a better word is that clubs were used by shepherds to defend their sheep against predators. So in the same way, in those dark valleys, on those right paths that go through the wilderness, it's good to have a protector. But that rod and that club, what we have heard traditionally as a rod, but also it could be a club, is also a metaphor for the law. Now, sometimes we think of that, well, that rod is a rod of discipline, but it's not really. No, That rod is more like a club of protection, to protect us. So the law is not there so much to discipline us as it is there to protect us from our enemies and protect us from predators. And the same way, the staff is more like a walking stick. It's more like to help you walk around the desert. It's like a cane for the aged to support you, to give you that third point to lean against. You can lean against God. So shepherds carried both clubs and staves. They're actually pictures, there's hieroglyphic pictures of these, of shepherds holding clubs and staves, because that was everything they needed to keep, for the comfort of the sheep, protection and comfort for the sheep. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You set a lavish meal for me in front of my enemies. So traditionally, of course, God feeds us, even when those enemies are around, maybe in spite of those enemies, to show those enemies who God is. But the wording here, again, is more lavish. It's more interesting than what we see here. And Eugene Peterson, in his paraphrase called The Message, does a really great job of describing this. He uses, and he believes the Hebrew gives the sense of a 6-course gourmet meal. So God does more than just protect and feed us. God celebrates us. God celebrates me, and he's on my side. He gives me more than I need in the fact that even when I'm surrounded by enemies. So David was made confident that God would bless him greatly, not just feed him and take care of him, but bless him greatly, despite the danger that he had all around him. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. And this adds so much to the last line, because that abundance is really apparent here. You honor me with olive oil on my head, and you fill my cup with gushing abundance of wine. Now, traditionally, God blesses me and gives me more than I need, and that is the message here. But I wanted to identify it. When we talk about oil, we're talking about olive oil. That's what we had there. And we talk about being anointed with it, like an honored guest. And we talk about not just a cup, but an overflowing cup, a cup of wine. So God is celebrating me as an honored guest, showing honor to me, and God is making sure that me as a guest, that my cup is always full. My wine cup is always full. And the thing that's so great about this is it's God's throwing a party. It's not just, being blessed. No, it's throwing a party, and he wants me to be his guest. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Now, surely is a very good word for this. Actually, it follows the Hebrew very, very well. Surely goodness and covenant loyalty will pursue me for the rest of my life. Now, traditionally, of course, God will be good to me and show mercy to me for my whole life. And that's true. But again, there's a couple words here that make a big difference. One is this word hased. And hased is more than just mercy. Hased is this steadfast love. In the Old Testament, you often see that phrase, steadfast love. It's actually more than even that. It's like covenant love or covenant loyalty that God shows to us. Isn't that strange? We often think that, well, we should be loyal to God. But you know what? In covenant, God's loyal to me too. And the other thing too is that the verb here is actually much more of a pursuit. It's much more of an active verb. than this idea of just being of follow me. No, it's to be pursued, just like enemies pursue. So instead of fear and badness that comes with being pursued by enemies, God turns it on its head. And instead, it says that no, this goodness and this steadfast love or covenant loyalty pursues me. God is far greater and more loving than we can possibly imagine for all the days of our life, for the rest of our lives. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I will return to the house of the Lord for all my days. Traditionally, I will be with God forever. But there's more to it than that. And that is that God has a place for me in the kingdom of God, and that God will always care for me. Now, the reason why the word return is here is that it's a little bit more for David, because David is returning to Jerusalem, returning to the house of God, which will eventually become the temple after David, but the house of God, the tabernacle of God. And he will be led there, and he will be fed and protected and guided there by God. So the main message here is that I think in our English translations, just because, our English translations go all the way back to King James and even before, and they have this formality and they have this maybe a little bit of a distance that really isn't there in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, the wording is much more lavish and abundant because God celebrates and adores you. God celebrates and adores me. That's much more of the sense that you get in the Hebrew. God is not punitive and controlling like we often try to portray God in the Old Testament. Instead, God is a guide for us. And even in the worst of times, God is full of abundance. And you see this over and over and over again in God's chesed, which is that steadfast love in the Old Testament. So I think the message for us too is that, this, like I said before, this psalm is often spoken and read in times of grief. So instead of that sort of that shame and cheap consolation that sometimes accompanies grief, it's to encourage you to be lavish and abundant in your love for others, just like God's lavish and abundant love is expressed in Psalm 23. And with this, grace and peace to you.